Okay, so I'm going to present some work in progress on group identity. So I think I don't need to motivate this terribly much for this audience, right? But our behavior is shaped very much by our identities, class, gender, race, nationality. And so economists are beginning to model identity and think about identity. And so there's some crucial first steps that have been taken toward modeling identity. But there are a lot of outstanding questions. Christina's talk actually is great lead-in here. So one of the things that I'm particularly interested in are these minimal group studies that she was talking about, where so this is the work of Teifel that she was mentioning, where people can be arbitrarily divided into groups. You're told you're the greens, and other people are told they're the reds. And people become groupie over these arbitrary groupings. So there are various senses in which people are groupie. So they'll say things like, oh, we the greens, we're superior to those reds along various dimensions. So they'll have beliefs of superiority. They'll show kind of in-group preference in terms of allocation of resources and things like that. So there are a whole set of ways in which people are groupie along these arbitrary boundaries in these experiments. So that's one thing I think we don't have good economic model of. So that's something I'll be thinking about. And there are a bunch of other questions that I'm going to try to address at least a bit with this model. So how are identities shaped by social interaction? Along with identities, there are notions of prescriptions. So how are you supposed to behave if you're a person of a particular identity? So gender norms would be one example of this. That, if you're male, there's a certain way men are supposed to behave, and similarly for female. So there's a question of how they arise and change. So at the very end, if I have time, I'll say something about that. And then there can be disagreement about who is part of an identity group. Why is there such disagreement? When do we tend to see such disagreement? And multiple identities are something I think economists haven't explored much at all, and is important to deal with. Okay, so the goal is going to be to try to make progress toward understanding how identities form, and I'm going to start with a very simple model that accounts for the findings of these minimal group studies, or tries to. And then I'm going to add layers to this simple model to build a richer picture. So that's the plan. So the model explores how identities are shaped by the desire for esteem. And so it builds on an earlier paper of mine, which explores how values are shaped by the desire for esteem. And so in that earlier paper, agents care both about self-esteem and peer esteem. And the desire for peer esteem motivates conformity in the choice of values. And the desire for self-esteem motivates differentiation. So, for instance, if there are a bunch of, you could think of a high school. If there are a bunch of jocks in the high school, then, it might be hard to be good at athletics, and you might become a nerd and value academics instead, and then you can say, oh, I'm superior to the jocks as a nerd, and they'll look down on the nerds similarly, right? So you can have that kind of situation, and then people will tend to divide into interaction groups around their values, because they like to interact with people who give them pure esteem. People who share your values are going to be the ones, at least in equilibrium, who give you esteem. Okay, so here I'm going to be looking at the tension is between conformity and differentiation. So that's what this sort of self-esteem and peer esteem is generating, that kind of tension. And here, so there's going to be also a concern about peer esteem and self-esteem, and the desire for peer esteem is going to motivate identification with peers, and the desire for self-esteem is going to motivate disidentification. So that's going to be the basic tension here. So let me give you a little intuition for that. So in this theory, people are going to adopt self-serving beliefs, or you could call these narratives if you want. about their identity groups. And this is going to make them, partisans for their group. So, you could imagine, for instance, suppose you're on a sports team, right? Your team has some record of how they performed that season, but you might have self-serving beliefs that actually our team's better than our win record, right? So that's the kind of thing you might have in mind. And so people are, in that sense, are partisans for their groups. So the benefit of being in a larger identity groups is they're going to be more partisans for your group, and that's going to be giving you peer esteem. So so that's that. But there's also a benefit of being in a smaller identity group, and that's that it's more special to be a member of a small group. So there's this Gilbert and Sullivan line: when everybody is somebody, then nobody is anybody. So that's the basic idea. So if I'm on a team and it can't be that special if everyone's on it, right? So you want to have someone outside the group you can look down on, effectively. So that's the idea. So that creates this tension between identification and disidentification. Okay, so I'm going to turn to the details of the model in a minute, but let me just, before I turn to the details of the model, let me try and put this in a slightly broader context of a kind of research agenda. So I think the broad topic of this paper, and something I'm exploring in other work too, I think there are a bunch of sort of papers that are thinking about this, thinking in this way. So the broad topic is belief formation, and particularly the role of social interaction in shaping beliefs. And so it's maybe useful to divide beliefs up into two categories. So economists normally talk about these positive beliefs. What is the world like? That's what positive beliefs address. You could also think, though, about normative beliefs. What is better? What is worse? So these values I was mentioning before, you could think of those as a normative belief. So I say that there. Okay. So identity, you can think of identity as a kind of package of beliefs. So there are two elements I would put into this package. So one is, who am I, who are others? So these are beliefs about your own type and other people's types. And identification you can think of as a belief that aspects of type are shared. So I'll mainly, in the paper, by the way, be concerned with these type 1 beliefs. So I'll have a little bit to say at the end about type 2. But there's also this second element of the package, which is how are people of a certain type supposed to behave? So these are sometimes called prescriptions in economics. Okay. So, so maybe a useful framework then to think about belief determination is that there's demand and supply. So demand is, what do I want to believe? So esteem considerations, which I'm going to be my main focus here, they're going to fit in on the demand side. They're going to affect what you want to believe. And then there's the supply side, the what am I able to believe side. So information, of course, is something that could constrain your positive beliefs. One might think of ethical principles as something that could constrain normative beliefs. And arguably, social interaction could appear on the supply side in the sense that, if there are a bunch of people you interact with who believe X, it may be hard to believe Y rather than X. So there are a whole set of things that appear on demand and supply sides. And so one could think about beliefs is being determined by these forces. So standard economics is really all about supply, taking also a narrow view of supply, that it's all about information. So it's all about, so that's one interpretation of classical economics, is that, it's information is the determinant of beliefs, and it's a supply side view of beliefs. So I think there's a lot to be learned from loosening the supply curve and introducing demand-side considerations. And so my focus with this model, one way to think about it, is that it's going to be almost exclusively about demand. And there's going to be a kind of implicit assumption in the model that agents are pretty unconstrained regarding the identities that they can adopt, right? So you could imagine sort of modifying this model to add more supply than I have. But I want to really focus on the role of demand with this model. Okay. So now I'm going to turn to a model, so it's going to get more concrete. Actually, let me say this. So I'm going to ask you to ask questions along the way. So feel free to chime in with questions along the way, and so then I won't take a break at the end for questions. So, okay. So here's the setup of the model. Okay. So there's going to be a population P consisting of n agents. And agents have an exogenously given achievement level. So AI is the achievement level of agent I. And then there's some set of possible identities that agents can adopt. And I'm going to assume that the number of identities exceeds the number of people. So people could all, if they wanted, have unique identities. Okay. And so agents, they're going to maximize utility function, and these are the components. So EII is agent I's self-esteem, and EIJ is the esteem that agent I is granted by agent J, and I sub I is agent I's interaction group. So what this is saying is you always care about self-esteem, and then you care about how you're esteemed by the people that you interact with. Okay? And beta is just a weight placed on self-esteem relative to peer esteem. Okay. So how is esteem awarded to people? So the assumption here is going to be the following. So this is agent I's esteem for agent L. That's what this formula at the top is. Okay, and so what it's saying is the following. So agent I is going to esteem agent L based on so TL is going to be the identity group of agent L. Okay, so you're going to look at the average achievement level of L's group. That's what that first term is. And then you're also going to add to it this B term. So this B term is agent I's belief about how much better identity group, L's identity group is than you would think based on its observed achievement level. Okay. So this is the term that's allowing for partisanship, right? That you can think your sports team's better than it looks on paper, right? So in other words, so I is going to say, here's how L's group subjectively performed. I'm going to have some belief about whether they're better or not than their objective performance, and then this last term is just comparing L's group to the overall population. So it's just subtracting the average of the whole population. Okay, so that esteem's then a relative consideration. Okay. So, any questions on that, or is that clear? Okay. Okay, and so there's going to be a game. This is the timing of the game. And I'll solve for the equilibrium of this game. So each agent is going to choose at a time 1. They're going to choose an identity group. And I should say an assumption here is that this is an assumption only of the baseline model, that people can choose whatever identity group they want, and others will accept it. So later on, I'm going to consider the possibility you might not be accepted as part of an identity group. But for now, I'm going to assume people accept your choice of identity. Okay, so that's what happens at time 1. Then at time 2, agents are going to choose beliefs about how much better each group is than it looks on paper. Okay, they're going to choose their BI of T's for each T. And then they're also going to choose with whom to initiate interaction. Okay, and agents I and J interact if they both initiate it. Doesn't really matter whether it's one or both who require initiation, but I need some assumption of that type. Okay, and then I'm going to assume agents prefer to initiate interaction if they're otherwise indifferent. Okay, so that's the setup of the model. Let me solve it for you now. So I'm going to start by solving it for the case of homogeneous achievement. So the AIs are the same for everybody.
AI is all on one scale, right? It's not like athletic achievement and
Yeah, exactly. It's so it's all on the real line. Do you have a question as well?
No, I was just.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Okay, so we can analyze the game by backward induction. And so take identity choices at time 1 as given, and let's consider what happens at time 2. So agents are going to choose to view their own identity groups as better than they appear, right? So you're going to go. So the maximum B you can choose is 1. So you're going to go up to the maximums. You can view the fact there's a maximum as imposing a little bit of a supply side constraint on belief. There's a limit to how much you can skew your beliefs about your group. So you're going to go up to the limit, and you're going to try and make your group look as good as possible. And then other groups, you're going to want them to look no better than they look on paper, because that maximizes your self-esteem to think of other groups as bad as possible. Okay, and then what are agents going to do in terms of their interactions? Well, you're going to have positive esteem for people who are in your identity group, and you're going to have negative esteem for people who are outside your identity group. And so what's maximizing to your peer esteem utility is to interact exclusively with people in your identity group. Okay, and so that's what people do at time 2. Okay, so that's time 2 of the model. And then we get a formula for the utility from membership in an identity group containing a fraction gamma of the population. Okay, and to keep life simple and avoid some integer issues that can arise in the model, I'm going to look at the limit as the number of people gets large. That makes the formula a little bit simpler. It looks like that. And so this term, the second term, so that's the esteem that's you accord yourself, and that's the esteem accorded to you by people in your identity group. And so then that gets multiplied by a beta, that's the self-esteem weight. And then gamma, this is the peer, so this times this, that's the peer esteem utility, right? These are the number of people you interact with, and then this is what they give you in peer esteem. Does that make sense? So you can see there's this Gilbert and Sullivan effect that as the group gets larger, right, as the self-esteem and the esteem that people in your group accord you goes down because your group's less special. On the other hand, there's this benefit of being in a larger group because there are more people to kind of accord you positive esteem. So there's a non-monotonic effect then of group size on utility. So it looks like this. So it's initially increasing due to you like to have some peers to interact with who give you esteem and are partisan for you, but then eventually it's decreasing. So there's some optimal group size from the point of view of utility, gamma star. And gamma star is, as you would expect, it's going to be falling in beta. So the more you care about self-esteem relative to peer esteem, then the smaller you want the group size to be. Okay. So that still doesn't tell us yet so we can now sort of think, we're now in a position to think about the time 1 of the game and what the equilibrium looks like at time 1, but we still need a little bit more analysis. So agents are going to divide here into groups of equal size in equilibrium. And in equilibrium, there are 2 conditions that have to be satisfied for it to be in equilibrium. So one is that it can't be profitable to switch groups. And that places a lower bound on the equilibrium group size. And it also can't be profitable to start a brand new group. And that places an upper bound on the equilibrium group size. So here's what these bounds look like. So the lower bound is going to be the gamma star. So So if groups are less than gamma star, then you'd want to join one of those groups that gets bigger, and the utility goes up. And then, so gamma H is determined by, where, if you start a new group, it would give you this utility level. So that determines the gamma H. So these are the bounds on group size. And gamma H, I should say, is just 1 minus beta. So both of these bounds are decreasing as you care more about self-esteem. So in equilibrium, so let GEQ denote the equilibrium number of groups, right? The corresponding group sizes will be 1 over GEQ. So GEQ can be any integer that satisfies the condition that 1 over G is between these bounds. So that's a characterization of the equilibria here. Okay. Okay, so now some remarks. So I would argue this helps us understand these minimal group studies, right? So here, you've got a homogeneous population, and people have this natural desire to kind of break up into groups so that they have people that they can share peer esteem with, but also people they can look down upon. And you can think of maybe what these experiments are doing in saying you're greens and you're reds is they are coordinating people on a particular division into groups. So as the previous slide was kind of indicating, there are lots of ways in which we could be divided up into groups that would be in equilibrium, and so this may be making a certain division focal. Okay, and so so these studies find, as I was saying earlier, that subjects view their own groups as superior, and that's also in line with what the model predicts. So this is a line from Alex Haslam from a book of his on social identity theory. So the quest for positive distinctiveness means that when people's sense of who they are is defined in terms of we rather than I, they want to see us as different to and better than them in order to feel good about who and what they are. So I think that's the kind of motivation that's taking place in the model. Okay. Question?
Before you go on, can I ask a question about the very beginning where
Sure.
There's this something innate called self-esteem.
Yes.
But couldn't you argue that self-esteem is intrinsically dependent on what other people think of you? That there is no such thing as self-esteem.
So I do agree with what you're saying. So I think so there's in a sense an artificial separation into what I'm calling self-esteem and peer esteem, and you could call peer esteem as defined here an aspect of your self-esteem. I think that would be appropriate. So it's hard to have a good terminology here, but I'm very sympathetic to what you're saying. Was there another question? Yeah.
So the thing, the equilibrium depends on beta.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
So what kind of thing in reality changing beta?
So I actually I don't really want to think of that as a parameter to change around. So I'll have some other parameters to change around in a bit, but I'm really putting it there and emphasizing it for the sake of giving the intuition of the role of self-esteem versus peer esteem. Yeah.
I have a question that's sort of something I always wonder about. So I went to high school in Germany, and I'm very scared of my kids going to high school in the US because I have this image, because you use this like nerd and jock.
Exactly. Yes.
This image where like you enter high school is kind of like a prison ward. You immediately try to join a group.
Right.
Of something bad happening to you.
Right.
Whereas in Germany, you enter a school at age 5, and then at age 10, and then you stay together until age 19. And so this notion of, from this quote that you had, when my identity is defined by we rather than I, then the things that you just showed us in the model happen. And it seems to me that in Germany, identity is more, as a teenager, you're forming your identity surrounded by people that have already known you for 4 or 5 years. And so it seems to me that in that scenario, there's like a sense of safety where identity is actually more defined by I.
That's very interesting.
You have these things that don't seem to happen in the US. We have like, it might be that the nerd is the hardest beer drinker.
Yeah.
Like you have this like crossover where you belong to many groups. And
Yeah.
The whole thing is much more, there's elements of jockiness and nerdiness and all that, but it's a much more sort of permeable world where you can be in many groups.
I think that's a very interesting
And I
observation.
wonder, it seems like there's something in the primitives there, in the basic, I don't know, setup of how identity is formed that your model is already assuming.
So, okay, so I mean, one thing you're hinting at, I mean, there are many things in your comment, but one thing you're hinting at is that, you know, there's a need to put in multiple identities here, which I'll have an approach to later by having multiple notions of achievement and the possibility of grouping with different people over different types of achievement. So, I'll get to that hopefully.
So
Yeah.
Kristen's question actually brought up something I was thinking too. Do we care about kind of your relative status within the group as far as, you know, being a big fish in a small pond or a small fish in a big pond in terms of within the group, how much status or how much enjoyment you get from being within that group? And does that affect, if so, does that affect the way we should be thinking about things?
Yeah, so I think you could argue that that's also about multiple identities, that, you know, there's some esteem coming from the group membership itself, but then there's some individual esteem component, and so that's the who you are within the pond. So I'll try and get to that bit. I'm a little lacking for time, so hopefully I'll probably only just give you a brief bit on multiple identities, but I think that there are lots of places one can go from here. Okay, good questions and comments. So, okay, so one thing we can do, so what I presented so far, people chose their social interactions. One question is, what happens if we force people to interact? How does that affect identity choice? So, so if agents are forced to interact, they care more about obtaining one another's esteem, and that increases the incentives to identify. So, so suppose agents don't choose their interactions at time 2. Instead, agents are exogenously partitioned into interaction groups. So the result, at least of this simple model, is that people will identify with the set of people they're forced to interact with, and that's it. So this is in line with, I think, various results on kind of forcing interaction and its effect, such as probably some of you know Robber's Cave. So that's, you know, so there are various things that kind of, I think, are suggestive of the role of forced interactions in leading people to identify. Okay, so let's see, how am I doing time-wise? I have until, I think, 12:30, right? Okay, so I have to move a little bit quickly. Okay, so one next step we can do is we can think about heterogeneity in achievement. So what does that do? So this introduces an additional consideration. So agents gain self-esteem by identifying with high achievers, and they lose self-esteem by identifying with low achievers. So that now becomes an additional thing we have to think about. And so you might in fact think that equilibria wouldn't even exist in this world. So the low achievers, you might think, want to identify with the high achievers, but the high achievers, they don't want to identify with the low achievers. So you might think, you know, unless we allow for some kind of exclusion of people from groups, that, you know, there aren't going to be equilibria. But the desire for peer esteem creates some willingness of high achievers to identify with lower achievers. And so let me show you now what happens. So let delta be a measure of inequality. So it's the difference between the maximum achievement level within the population and the average. So whether equilibria exist and what they look like if they do is going to depend upon this degree of inequality, delta. And so for simplicity, I'm just going to focus on equilibria where all groups have the same achievement level, and in equilibria of that type, groups will be of the same size. Okay, I'm going to move quickly, but we could talk more about that. So again, we're going to have bounds on the equilibrium group size. Okay, but now the lower and upper bounds, they're going to depend upon delta. So in both cases, it's the highest achievers who are most tempted to deviate. So it's the high achievers who create these bounds. And so here's what happens. So as delta goes up, these bounds, they move inward. And at some point, if delta gets large enough, those bounds will cross, and then equilibria do disappear. Okay. So, if gamma L, if the bounds have crossed, equilibria don't exist. And so you can show that they only exist if the amount of inequality is below some cutoff. So there's some maximum amount of inequality that can be sustained. Yeah?
When you say no equilibrium, you mean no pure equilibrium exists, right?
That's, yeah, absolutely. I'm focused on pure strategy equilibrium. That's right. Okay. And so this maximum bound, I should say, it's also decreasing in the amount of the amount you care about self-esteem. The more you care about self-esteem, these high achievers are less willing to be grouped in with low achievers. Okay, and here are formulas for those things, which you don't have to stare at, but they exist. Okay. So, all right, so some remarks on this. So, so one of the sort of classic books on nationalism by Benedict Anderson, he talks about the nationalism's intention with a tendency for elites to form common cross-national identities, right? So you can kind of see this kind of tension here in this model, that what the high achieving types want to do is they want to separate themselves out, right? He talks about how, there are common languages, for instance, of elites. Latin was in medieval Europe as a kind of common language of the elites, and then the French and German were languages of the Romanov court. So there are these kind of elite languages that bunch them together. People like Eugen Weber have talked about how, things like railways, newspapers, schools are forces that help in creating nationalism. In terms of the model, you could think of these as things that help promote within-country interaction. Rising inequality today, maybe this is something that's threatening nationalism. So we were talking at dinner last night about how elites seem to be increasingly identifying in a cross-national way. Perhaps there are also technologies today that are doing the reverse of this and helping elites to form common identities across national boundaries. Okay, how am I doing time? Okay, so I'm going to have to speed quickly through this material, but I want to just give you a quick taste of it. So far we've assumed there's no possibility of excluding people from identity groups. So a next step we can do is we can try and think about exclusion, which is in point of fact, I think, very important. So what if it's possible to exclude? Well, there are two reasons to exclude, right? So one is that high achievers want to keep out low achievers, but also remember that the group sizes will be higher than the gamma star in general. And so that's another reason to exclude. Okay, so a simple way to model exclusion is to have agents choose sort of candidate identities, T tildes, and then to allow any agent to oppose another agent's identity choice at some cost. And then agents only get the identity of their choice if unopposed. And if you're opposed, then you get some unique identity, and you don't get to be in anyone else's identity group. So this is very stylized, this model. I don't think this is super realistic. I'll quickly give you a more realistic take as well. But this kind of model, what you get out of it is that at the top of the distribution you get exclusionary groups, and then at the bottom you either get non-exclusionary groups. So this isn't a single group, but it's people divided up into non-exclusionary groups. So this is what you get when, in this case, what this is saying is that there's a high ability to think of yourself as maybe better than you look on paper as a group, right? This is about the size of the B's relative to the A's. So what happens if the B's are smaller relative to the A's is that actually people at the bottom of the distribution they're not able to form groups. So this is getting at the idea that actually you have to be able to have some pride in being part of a group in order for people to be able to form into groups. Okay, and there's some comparative statics here on the amount of exclusion, but I'm going to move quickly. Okay. So we can also take maybe a more realistic approach to exclusion, and I'm going to say this very quickly. We can talk more in the break. So here you could imagine, so you could imagine agents. So what I'm going to So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do this very briefly, is I'm going to assume that agents, they don't just choose their beliefs about who they are. You're also going to choose your beliefs about who other people are. So you're going to have a belief about the type of other people, not just yourself. And so there's then the possibility of disagreement, right? I could, as a high type, say to a low achieving type, well, I don't think you're part of my group. But the low achieving type, they could still maybe say, oh, I think I'm part of this group. So you can have that dissonance. Okay, and so there's a lot to doing that. But okay, and I'm going to have to skip through this. But so I guess one thing you can get out of this is you can get cases where people there will be in equilibrium some dissonance. So people at the top of the achievement distribution within it. So you get some exclusion. So you get some division into groups in some exclusionary way, like this. So there'll be a kind of partitioning of the space, achievement space like this. But people at the top of the distribution are going to have a narrower conception of who's in this group from people who are at the bottom.
Group identity is subjective. It's based on the individual perspective.
Exactly. Okay, and then, okay, I have just enough time to give you a hint of multiple identities. So a way to kind of extend this model to multiple identities. So, you can think of each group, each identity affiliation you take pride in something different, right? So, if, your sports team, you take pride particularly in the athletic achievement of that team. Maybe there are other things too, but that would be a particular focus. Whereas, with your family, it's something else that you take pride in from being part of your family. So you can think of each of these groups as having an associated type of achievement that they're taking pride in. So one could think then of, okay, so the way I'm thinking of modeling this is there are M activities. Individuals have achievement levels at each of those activities. And then over each of these types of activities with their associated achievements, you can form identity groups. And then you can have a multidimensional identity over that. So you can also add to this values, which has been a subject of other things I've been doing, which is, do you value achievement at that particular type of activity or not? So here you can think, so either, so here are these, so then your overall esteem is based on a kind of sum of esteem from each of these activities weighted by whether you value them or not. That's the basic idea. Okay, and so let's see. I'll just make a few kind of observations of some things one can get out of this. So first observation of what one can get out of adding multiple identities is that agents will be excluded from identity groups unless they have positive esteem for others in the group. And this creates an incentive to do one of the following. So there are two strategies one could take to dealing with that so that you're sort of included in a group, right? So one thing you could do is you could value your own individual achievements less so that people don't exclude you from an identity group. So you have to exert some humbleness about your individual achievements so that you're included in groups. So that's one thing you could do. Another thing you could do is you could also value others' achievements more. So we have our different achievements, and I value yours, but I still value mine, and so I'm still giving esteem to you. And one can think of different cultures as maybe placing different weights on these two things. So sort of, so there's a very good book called Preschool in Three Cultures. And I think one of the things it's kind of arguing is that Sort of Japanese culture maybe is a little bit more emphasizing this, and maybe American culture is a little bit more emphasizing two as a strategy. Okay, so and then I've got to wrap up, but a second observation I'll make is that one can think of identity shaping values, values in turn shaping identity. So identity shape value choice, right? So for instance, Arlie Hochschild talks about white working class who often identify with the rich. And so this would then, if you're identifying with the rich, this would lead you to value economic success more than you would otherwise, and maybe get you to vote, in fact, against your personal economic interests. So by the same token, values can shape identities. So Ron Chernow's biography of Washington, he talks about Washington's great desire to join the British Army. And so, here he kind of held British values, and so that really made him want to be able to identify as British and be part of the British Army. And they spurned him, of course, and maybe that was a mistake. Maybe that caused a revolution. Okay, so I think I don't have time for prescriptions, but happy to talk about that more in the break. So, thank you.